Something shifted in the air the moment the military working dog stopped walking. The auditorium at Chesapeake Veterans Hall had been loud seconds earlier. Children whispering, chairs scraping, a brass band warming up near the stage. Veterans Day banners hung from the rafters, and a local news crew angled their cameras toward the podium where speeches were about to begin. But when the dog froze mid-stride, every sound thinned into silence. His handler gave a soft command. The dog did not respond. Instead, he lifted his nose slightly, as if catching a scent carried on memory rather than air. His body went still, muscles tight but not aggressive. Then, without urgency and without permission, he stepped forward. He walked past the color guard, past the mayor adjusting his tie, past rows of decorated veterans wearing medals polished for the occasion, past proud families holding small American flags. The handler followed, confused but unwilling to pull the lead too hard. In 8 years of service, this dog had never broken formation. Not in training. Not overseas. Not once. The crowd parted slowly. At the far side of the room, near the back wall beneath a faded exit sign, stood an elderly man in a plain navy jacket and worn boots. No medals on display. No front row seat. Just a quiet figure leaning lightly on a cane, as if unsure he belonged. The dog stopped in front of him, Saturday, and lowered his head. The old man stared down, hands trembling. His jaw tightened, then quivered in a way that betrayed decades of disciplined restraint. Slowly, almost afraid to believe it, he reached out and rested his palm against the dog's head. The dog closed his eyes. A tear slipped down the elderly man's cheek before he could stop it. No one understood what they were seeing. The handler certainly didn't. He stepped closer, about to apologize for the interruption, when the old man whispered a single word, so soft it barely carried beyond them. Shadow. The dog's tail thumped once against the polished floor. And in that single movement, 15 silent years came rushing back to a man who had sworn he would never let himself feel them again. His name was Commander William Will Mercer, retired United States Navy SEALs. 30 years of service. Multiple deployments to Afghanistan and Iraq. A silver star locked in a wooden box he never opened. To most in that auditorium, he was just another aging veteran who had shown up alone. But 15 years earlier, in the mountains outside Kandahar, he had not been alone. Shadow had been at his side. They had moved through compounds and across desert ridgelines together for 4 years. The dog was trained for detection, but to Will he had been something more. Steady breathing in the dark, silent reassurance before doors were breached, a living reminder that loyalty still existed in a world built on chaos. Then came the explosion. A pressure plate buried beneath dust and stone. One step too far. Will remembered the flash, the force, the silence that followed. He woke days later at Landstuhl Regional Medical Center, ribs fractured, shoulder torn by shrapnel. Machines hummed beside his bed. His hearing was dull and distant. He asked one question. Shadow. The nurse hesitated. The hesitation told him everything. They said the dog had been caught in the blast. They said the damage was too severe. They said he hadn't made it. Will nodded once and turned his face toward the window. He did not cry. Men like him rarely did in front of others. But something inside him fractured deeper than bone. Shadow had trusted him completely. And in the darkest corner of his mind, Will believed he had failed that trust. He retired 6 months later and returned to his quiet home in Chesapeake. Each night before sleeping, he opened a drawer and removed a worn leather collar recovered from the site. He ran his thumb along the buckle and whispered into the dark, "I'm sorry, boy." 15 years of that ritual. 15 years of guilt carried alone. And now the dog sitting at his feet, older, grayer, but unmistakable, lifted his head and looked into Will's eyes as if no time had passed at all. The handler finally found his voice. Staff Sergeant Marcus Hale stepped forward slowly, his expression no longer confused but stunned. "Sir," he said carefully, his original records were incomplete. After the blast, Shadow had been found alive beneath debris, barely breathing. He'd been evacuated to a veterinary unit, treated for months. In the chaos of that operation, files were misreported, names misplaced, a clerical error that was never corrected. By the time the mistake surfaced years later, Will Mercer had already retired. Contact attempts failed. Addresses outdated. Shadow returned to duty. He served 2 more deployments, performed flawlessly, obeyed every command. But Hale admitted something quietly: Shadow never bonded fully with another handler. It was as if part of him had remained somewhere else, waiting. Will listened without blinking. The cane slipped from his hand and clattered softly to the floor. His knees followed. Decorated officer. Combat veteran. A man who had endured firefights and loss without outward collapse. Now he sank down on the auditorium floor and wrapped both arms around the dog's neck. And he wept. Not politely. Not quietly. 15 years of regret poured out in shaking breaths. His forehead pressed into coarse foregone silver around the muzzle. Shadow leaned into him, steady and solid, as if anchoring him to the present. The crowd stood frozen. Some wiped their eyes openly. Even the mayor lowered his gaze. Will finally pulled back just enough to look at the dog again. "I never left you," he whispered. Shadow's tail tapped gently against the floor. 6 weeks later, at a small ceremony attended by fellow veterans and members of the United States Navy, Shadow was officially retired with honors. This time, Will stood in the front row. Shadow didn't return to a kennel. He went home. That night, for the first time in 15 years, Will slept without reaching into a drawer for an empty collar. Instead, he listened to the slow, steady breathing at the foot of his bed. In the quiet darkness, he spoke 2 words he had waited half a lifetime to say. "Welcome home."